My cousin tried to steal every date I brought to holidays, until I started dating her therapist. Thanksgiving used to make me nervous for reasons most people would never understand. My name is Natalie. I am 32 years old, and I grew up in Michigan in one of those families where nearly everyone lives within 20 miles of everyone else. In my family, holidays were never optional. If you missed Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, or even the 4th of July barbecue, you could expect phone calls, guilt, and eventually the full force of Grandma Ruth's disappointment. My cousin Brianna was 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I could remember, she had been treated like the golden child. She was genuinely beautiful, the kind of woman people noticed the moment she entered a room. She had long blonde hair, green eyes, a perfect figure, and the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life watching men trip over themselves to impress her. The problem was not that she was attractive. The problem was that she seemed to need proof of it constantly, and for reasons I did not understand at the time, the men I dated became her favorite source of validation. The first time it happened, I was 23 and dating a graphic designer named Ethan. He was sweet, quiet, and a little shy, and after 4 months together, he told me he was serious about us and wanted to meet my family. I warned him that my relatives could be overwhelming, but I did not warn him about Brianna because, back then, I still believed family members were supposed to respect obvious boundaries. Thanksgiving dinner was at my Aunt Rebecca's house. Brianna arrived in a tiny red dress that looked more appropriate for a nightclub than a family meal, but no one said anything because no one ever challenged her. My mother gave me a tired look while she mashed potatoes, as if she already knew what was coming. After dinner, Ethan and I were sitting on the couch talking with one of my uncles when Brianna walked over, squeezed herself directly between us, and pressed her leg against his. She asked question after question about his work, laughed too loudly at everything he said, touched his arm whenever she smiled, and leaned forward in a way that made her intentions impossible to miss. I was sitting right there, but she behaved as if I were invisible. Ethan looked uncomfortable at first, yet I also saw the attention getting to him. Later that evening, I found the two of them alone in the kitchen. Brianna had one hand resting on his chest, while she laughed at something he had said. When they noticed me, she smiled with practiced innocence and said, "I was just telling Ethan how lucky he is to have you." 3 weeks later, Ethan ended our relationship, claiming he needed space and was not ready for anything serious. 2 months after that, I saw him tagged in one of Brianna's social media photos at a downtown bar, his arm wrapped around her waist. That should have been the moment my family admitted something was wrong. Instead, it became the beginning of a pattern they spent years pretending not to see. Every relationship after Ethan followed some version of the same script. When I was 25, I dated a teacher named Luke. At a family gathering, Brianna cornered him beside the dessert table and spent half an hour telling him about her volunteer work with underprivileged children. Before the night was over, they had exchanged numbers so they could supposedly coordinate a charity opportunity. I later discovered they had been texting privately for weeks. Then there was Colin, an accountant who seemed dependable until Brianna asked him to come to her apartment and help move furniture. I was not invited. When I questioned him about it, he became defensive and accused me of being jealous and controlling. There were others after that: Derek, Mason, Adrian, and every time I brought someone to a holiday, Brianna arrived dressed for attention, studied him like a challenge, and slowly drew him away from me. Sometimes she flirted openly. Sometimes she acted vulnerable and asked for help. Sometimes she pretended she was simply being friendly. The method changed, but the outcome rarely did. What hurt almost as much as the betrayals was the way my family responded. My mother would pull me aside and say Brianna was young, and probably did not mean anything by it. Aunt Rebecca told me that if I could not handle a little competition, I should stop bringing men around. Grandma Ruth advised me to become more feminine so I could keep a man interested. Nobody asked why my own cousin repeatedly pursued people I was dating. Nobody told her to stop. They acted as if her behavior was natural, and my pain was a character flaw. Eventually, I stopped bringing dates to family events altogether. For years, I attended every holiday alone and told everyone I was focused on my career. The truth was that I still dated, but I kept those relationships separate because I refused to give Brianna another target. Then, when I was 31, I met Owen. He was a doctor, funny, kind, attractive, and emotionally steady. We had been together for 8 months, and it was the healthiest relationship I had ever experienced. He kept asking to meet my family, and I kept inventing excuses until Christmas approached and avoiding the issue started to feel dishonest. I finally sat him down and told him everything. I described Brianna's behavior, the men she had drawn away, the excuses my family made, and the fear I carried into every holiday. I told him she would probably flirt with him, touch him, try to isolate him, and present herself as a better option. Owen laughed, not cruelly, but with the confidence of someone who thought the situation sounded absurd. Natalie, I'm a grown man, he said. Your cousin is not going to seduce me at a Christmas party. I love you. Stop worrying. I wanted to trust him. On Christmas Eve, he held my hand during the drive to my parents' house and repeated that everything would be fine. Brianna was already there when we arrived, wearing a white sweater dress so tight it looked painted onto her body, along with high heels that made her legs seem endless. Her hair fell in perfect waves, and the instant she saw Owen, her expression changed. She walked over with a bright smile and said, "You must be Owen. I've heard so much about you. Natalie is so lucky." Then she hugged him for several seconds, longer than necessary. At first, Owen did everything right. He remained polite but distant, kept an arm around my waist, kissed my forehead, and stayed close enough that I began to relax. Brianna did not give up. She circled us all evening, joined every conversation, laughed at his jokes, and asked detailed questions about his medical work. Eventually, she spilled wine on her dress and asked him to help her clean it because he was a doctor and therefore, according to her ridiculous logic, must know how to remove stains. I watched him hesitate. I watched him glance at me. Then, I watched him follow her into the kitchen. They were gone for 15 minutes. When they returned, Brianna's dress looked fine, and Owen's face was flushed. He insisted she had only asked about her mother's upcoming knee surgery, but on the drive home, I cried while he accused me of overreacting. He swore nothing had happened, and said Brianna was simply friendly. Still, I recognized the look in his eyes, the same curiosity and fascination I had seen before. We broke up in February after he said he needed to focus on his residency. In March, I spotted him at a restaurant with another blonde woman. It was not Brianna, but by then the distinction barely mattered. Something in me had finally broken. I stopped dating, stopped attending family events, and began ignoring most of my mother's calls. I was exhausted from being humiliated, and even more exhausted from being told the humiliation was my fault. The change in my life began in a place I never would have expected. I started volunteering with a literacy program at a local library because I needed something meaningful to fill the time I had once spent worrying about relationships and family gatherings. One part of the program paired volunteers with incarcerated adults who wanted to improve their reading and writing. I signed up believing it would be a simple way to help someone, and I was matched with a 34-year-old inmate named Grant. He was serving the final 2 years of a 7-year sentence for armed robbery. His first letter was brief and careful, only a few sentences thanking me for volunteering and explaining that he hoped to become a stronger writer before he was released. I wrote back about my work as a project manager at a technology company, my love of hiking, and the unpredictable weather in Michigan. His next letter contained more of himself. He told me about growing up in Detroit, making terrible choices when he was young, and spending years in prison thinking about the kind of man he wanted to become. His writing was imperfect, but it was honest. There was no performance in it, no polished charm, and no attempt to manipulate me. We began writing once a week, then twice a week, and eventually almost every day. Grant told me about the books he was reading, the anger management classes he had completed, and his plans for life after release. He wanted to work in construction, save money, and possibly attend community college. His aunt in Grand Rapids had offered him a place to stay until he could support himself. In return, I told him about my family and, little by little, about Brianna. I described the holidays, the men, the humiliation, and the way everyone treated me as if I were bitter for noticing what was happening. Grant did not tell me to be more confident or to stop being jealous. He wrote, "Your cousin sounds miserable. Some people only feel powerful when they make someone else feel small. That isn't about you. It's about her." The simplicity of that observation affected me more than years of advice from people who supposedly loved me. We corresponded for 8 months, and his letters became the part of my week I looked forward to most. He was funny, thoughtful, and vulnerable, in a way none of my previous partners had been. Then he wrote to tell me he would be released in 2 months. He asked whether I would consider meeting him for coffee after he got out, adding that he understood completely if the situation felt too complicated. I said yes. Maybe I was lonely. Maybe I was curious. Mostly, I think I wanted one part of my life that belonged entirely to me and had never been touched by Brianna. Grant was released in October, and we met at a coffee shop in Grand Rapids. I recognized him immediately from the small, blurry photograph that had accompanied his first letter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with short dark hair and a nervous smile. He was handsome, but not in the polished way of the men I usually dated. He looked real. We talked for 3 hours about his drywall job, the challenge of adjusting to freedom, his aunt's house, my apartment, my career, and my complicated family. Nothing felt forced. Before we left, he asked to see me again, and I agreed. We started dating. Although calling it that felt strange at first because our emotional connection had already existed for months. We went to movies, shared inexpensive dinners, and walked along the river. His adjustment to life outside was not effortless. Crowded stores overwhelmed him. He sometimes woke before dawn because his body was still used to prison schedules, and he was careful with every dollar he earned. None of that made him frightening or unstable. It made him human, and unlike the men I had dated before, he did not hide the difficult parts of himself behind charm. When he had a bad day, he told me. When he made a mistake, he apologized without turning the conversation into an accusation against me. Grant listened when I spoke. He said what he meant. He noticed when I was anxious before I explained it, and he seemed to understand when I needed space and when I needed to be held. For the first time, I felt as if someone actually saw me instead of comparing me to the person standing beside me. In November, my mother called and asked whether I was coming to Thanksgiving. She reminded me that Grandma Ruth had been asking about me and said the whole family missed me. It had been almost a year since I had attended a holiday, and although I had been avoiding my mother's calls, I finally told her I would think about it. That night, while Grant and I were lying in bed, I mentioned the invitation and explained why the idea made me sick. I told him the entire history again, not because he had forgotten it, but because bringing him into that house felt different from writing about it in a letter. Grant listened and then said, "Take me." I laughed because I assumed he was joking. He repeated that he wanted to meet my family and see Brianna for himself. I warned him that she would come after him aggressively, that she had ruined every relationship I had ever brought around her, and that she knew exactly how to make men feel chosen. Grant shrugged and said, "I spent 7 years in prison. I think I can handle your cousin." His confidence did not sound like Owen's careless confidence. It sounded measured, as if he understood manipulation better than I did. Still, on Thanksgiving morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach. Grant wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, shaved carefully, and looked like any ordinary man being introduced to his girlfriend's family. During the drive to my parents' house, I gave him one final warning. I told him Brianna would flirt, touch him, try to get him alone, and probably insult me in ways designed to sound helpful. He took my hand and said, "Natalie, I'm not going anywhere." When we arrived, my mother hugged me as if I had been missing for years. My father shook Grant's hand, asked what he did for work, and immediately began telling him about the deck he had built the previous summer. For a few minutes, everything felt almost normal. Then Brianna came out of the kitchen wearing a tight black dress, with a plunging neckline and heels that made no sense for a family dinner. The moment she saw Grant, I could practically see her assessing him. She approached with a predatory smile, extended her hand, and introduced herself as my cousin. Grant shook it briefly and said it was nice to meet her. Brianna held on for an extra second and remarked that she had heard absolutely nothing about him because I kept my life so private. She asked how long we had been together and how we had met. I hesitated, unsure how my family would react to the truth, but Grant answered calmly, through a pen pal program. Brianna's eyes brightened. She asked whether it was one of those online programs and called the story adorable. Grant merely said it was something like that. Then she began her routine. She asked about his job, his childhood, his hobbies, and his plans. She touched his arm when she laughed and leaned close whenever he spoke. Grant answered politely but briefly, then turned back toward me or redirected the conversation to someone else. He kept a hand on my lower back. When Brianna suggested that he help her carry extra chairs in from the garage, he said her father could probably handle it and remained beside me. I watched irritation replace confidence on her face. At dinner, she sat across from us and tried everything she could think of. She asked about sports, movies, music, and travel. She told stories designed to make herself sound adventurous, compassionate, and irresistible. Grant nodded occasionally, but spent more time discussing fishing with my uncle and asking Grandma Ruth about her stuffing recipe. Under the table, he held my hand. After dinner, everyone moved into the living room, and Brianna finally cornered him beside the drink table. From across the room, I saw her lean close, touch his chest, and whisper something near his ear. My body reacted before my mind did. My heart pounded, and every previous holiday seemed to collapse into that one moment. Then Grant stepped backward. He said something I could not hear, turned away from her, and came directly back to sit beside me. Brianna remained by the table, looking stunned. My mother leaned toward me and whispered, "I like this one. He seems steady." I nearly cried from the relief of hearing someone in my family finally recognize the difference. We stayed another hour, and although Brianna kept circling, Grant treated her like an ordinary person instead of the center of the room. On the drive home, I asked what she had whispered to him. He hesitated before telling me the truth. Brianna had said I was damaged and insecure, that he could do better, and then she gave him her phone number. I felt my stomach drop even though her behavior was exactly what I had predicted. I asked what he had said. Grant told me, I said I wasn't interested, and that she should work on becoming a better person before trying to ruin someone else's life. I started crying, not because I was hurt, but because years of tension suddenly released at once. Grant pulled the car to the side of the road and held me while I sobbed. He did not tell me to calm down or ask why I was making such a big deal out of it. He simply waited until I could breathe again. Then I asked the question that had haunted me through every failed relationship. Why had he not fallen for her when everyone else had Brianna was beautiful, charming, practiced, and relentless? Grant looked at me as if the answer were obvious. I spent 7 years around people who survived by reading other people, he said. Your cousin isn't confident. She's desperate, and desperate people are easy to recognize. Besides, I'm in love with you. Why would I want someone like her when I have you? I kissed him right there in the car. For one perfect moment, it felt as if the story had finally ended. Grant had resisted her. Brianna had failed. I had been chosen. But a week later, my mother called sounding upset. Brianna had apparently arrived at her house in tears after researching Grant online and discovering his criminal record. She claimed I had brought a convicted felon to Thanksgiving without warning anyone, and said she had felt unsafe and disrespected. I reminded my mother that Grant had served his sentence and was rebuilding his life. I told her Brianna was only angry because she had failed to manipulate him. My mother sighed and said, I know she can be difficult, but bringing someone with that history into a family gathering without telling us was not okay. Your father is upset. Grandma Ruth is worried. I hung up. For the next 3 weeks, messages poured in from relatives. Aunt Rebecca called me selfish. One uncle said I should have disclosed Grant's past. My cousin Lauren, whom I had always liked, sent a long message saying I needed to think about everyone else's feelings and safety. Only my younger brother wrote to say that Brianna was being dramatic, and Grant seemed like a good guy. His message mattered because it was the first time anyone in my immediate family had looked at the actual behavior in front of them instead of automatically protecting Brianna. Still, one supportive text could not undo years of conditioning. Every accusation from the others made me question myself for a moment, and I had to keep returning to the facts. Grant had been respectful, Brianna had approached him, and the family had not been in danger. Grant felt responsible. He said he should have warned me that his record might become an issue, and perhaps should have encouraged me to tell my family in advance. I refused to let him carry all the blame. He had done nothing threatening at Thanksgiving. My family was simply using his past to make Brianna the victim again. Even so, the situation hurt. I had finally found someone honest and dependable, and instead of being happy for me, my relatives treated him like a danger because Brianna had been rejected. I skipped Christmas and spent it at Grant's aunt's house. She served ham and mashed potatoes, asked normal questions, and never once made a passive-aggressive remark. It was the best Christmas I could remember. In January, Lauren called and asked to meet in person because she had something important to tell me. We met at a coffee shop, where she ordered a latte and held the cup without drinking. She explained that Brianna had started therapy the previous year after developing panic attacks. According to Lauren, the therapist believed Brianna was deeply insecure and depended on constant male attention to feel valuable. I immediately said that insecurity did not excuse what she had done. Lauren agreed. She told me the therapist had encouraged Brianna to apologize and confront the years of damage she had caused, but Brianna refused, insisting I was jealous and bitter and that she owed me nothing. Then Thanksgiving happened. Brianna went to Lauren's apartment that night and broke down because Grant had not responded to her usual tactics. She said she felt invisible for the first time in her life and could not understand why he was not interested. I admitted that part of me was glad she had finally experienced the feeling she had forced on me for years. Lauren looked down at her coffee and said there was more. Brianna had become obsessed with Grant. She found old social media accounts from before his incarceration, searched for articles about his arrest, located his former girlfriend, and contacted her for information. She was the person who told my mother about his record. She had printed articles about the case and shown them to Grandma Ruth. More frighteningly, Lauren believed Brianna was preparing to make a police complaint, claiming Grant had threatened her at Thanksgiving. The possibility made me feel physically cold. A false accusation could damage his job, his reputation, and possibly his freedom. Lauren said she was warning me because Brianna was not thinking rationally and seemed determined to prove that Grant was dangerous. I left the coffee shop in a daze and called him immediately. After I explained everything, he became quiet and then said he had always known something like this could happen. People were often willing to believe the worst about anyone with a criminal record, especially when that person was trying to build a normal life. I said we needed to stop Brianna. Grant pointed out that there was technically nothing to stop yet, because she had not filed anything and he had not threatened her. If she lied, the accusation might eventually be dismissed, but even a dismissed report could follow him. For 2 days, I considered calling Brianna, warning my parents, speaking to a lawyer, or doing anything that might prevent her from acting. Then Grant proposed something that sounded reckless until he explained it. He suggested we allow her to file the report if she truly intended to do so, because he had evidence that would contradict her version of the encounter. He opened the voice memo application on his phone and told me he had recorded their conversation beside the drink table. Recording important interactions was a habit he had developed in prison because he had learned to protect himself whenever a situation felt unpredictable. The audio was clear. Brianna's voice said, "Natalie is damaged and insecure. You seem smart. You could do so much better. Here's my number. Call me if you want a real conversation." Then Grant's voice answered that he was not interested and that she should work on becoming a better person before trying to ruin someone else's life. Brianna responded with a bitter laugh and called him judgmental and boring. The recording ended there. It did not prove every detail of the evening, but it directly contradicted any claim that Grant had cornered, pursued, or intimidated her. It showed that she had approached him, insulted me, offered her number, and became angry only after he rejected her. We saved multiple copies and agreed not to use it unless she filed a false report. Grant kept the original file on his phone, sent a copy to me, and backed up another version so it could not disappear if the device was lost or damaged. We did not circulate it among my relatives or use it to humiliate Brianna. The point was protection, not revenge. During those 3 weeks, every unknown number made my stomach tighten, and Grant checked his mail with a calmness I knew was partly an act. Nothing happened, and I began to hope Lauren had been wrong. Then my mother called to say Brianna had been in a minor car accident. It was only a fender bender, but she had gone to the hospital and was shaken. My mother asked me to visit. I said no. She accused me of being cruel and reminded me that Brianna was family, as though shared blood erased years of deliberate harm. I ended the call, yet guilt stayed with me because guilt was the language my family had trained me to understand. I felt guilty whenever I protected myself, whenever I set a boundary, and whenever someone else disliked the consequences of their own behavior. Eventually, I went to the hospital, not because I had forgiven Brianna, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I could show compassion without surrendering my boundaries. She was sitting upright in a private room with a small bandage on her forehead. When I entered, she looked genuinely surprised and said she had not expected me to come. I told her my mother said she wanted to see me. Brianna lowered her eyes and admitted that she had been deeply unwell. Her therapist believed she had used male attention to avoid confronting trauma from her childhood. She quickly added that trauma did not excuse what she had done to me. Then, for the first time in our lives, she admitted that she had been jealous. She said I had a stable career, my own apartment, intelligence, humor, and relationships with people who valued me as a person. She believed she had nothing except her appearance, and she was terrified of becoming invisible. Pursuing the men I dated had been her way of proving she was better than me. She had tried to take the one area of my life she believed she could control. Tears ran down her face as she apologized for damaging my relationships and making me feel worthless. I had imagined hearing that apology for years. I thought it would make me feel victorious. Instead, I felt tired. I told her I did not forgive her, and did not know whether I ever would, although I appreciated that she had finally admitted what she had done. I said I hoped she received the help she needed and learned who she was beyond her looks, but I would not be part of that process. I told her not to contact me or Grant, and then walked out. In the hallway, I ran into Lauren, who hugged me and said she was proud of me. When I asked why Brianna had changed so suddenly, Lauren explained that the police had contacted Brianna's therapist because Brianna had apparently scheduled a time to make a complaint against Grant. The therapist persuaded her that filing a false report would damage both of their lives and forced her to confront what she was actually feeling, instead of trying to punish a man for rejecting her. Brianna had truly been prepared to do it. The fact that she stopped mattered, but it did not erase how close she had come. I called Grant from the hospital parking lot and told him everything. After a quiet pause, he asked whether I thought the situation was finally over. I said I hoped so. Then he surprised me by asking me to move in with him. He said he had spent 7 years alone in a cell and did not want to waste more time pretending he was uncertain about what he wanted. He loved me and wanted to build a life together. I said yes. I moved in with Grant in March. We found a small apartment near his job. Nothing luxurious, but it belonged to us. We adopted an abandoned shelter dog named Rocket, a scruffy mutt who settled between us as if he had always been part of the family. Our life became quiet, ordinary, and boring in the most beautiful way. I did not speak to Brianna, and I skipped Easter and Mother's Day. I stayed in contact with Lauren and my younger brother, but everyone else had to respect the distance I needed. In June, my mother called to ask whether I would attend the 4th of July barbecue. When I declined, she cried and said I was tearing the family apart. I told her the family had already been torn apart. I was simply the first person willing to admit it. Not long afterward, Brianna mailed me a handwritten letter. I nearly threw it away, but curiosity made me read it. She wrote about being sexually abused by a family friend when she was 12 and about not being believed when she told her parents. She explained that she had learned to treat her appearance and body as the only currency she possessed because those were the things people seemed to value. She described years of panic, therapy, medication, and confusion. She wrote that watching me build a stable life while she felt herself falling apart made her feel worthless. Instead of confronting that feeling, she convinced herself that taking away my happiness would make her feel stronger. She said she had entered intensive therapy, cut off toxic friends, and was trying to create an identity that did not depend on male approval. She did not ask for forgiveness. She said she only wanted me to understand. Reading about what had happened to her as a child complicated my anger, but it did not erase it. I could feel sympathy for the terrified 12-year-old she had been, while still holding the adult woman accountable for years of deliberate choices. Both things could be true at the same time, and accepting that helped me resist the old family habit of turning an explanation into an excuse. Inside the envelope, she included a printed photograph from one of the times she had been involved with a man I dated. I believed it was Colin, although so many years had passed that I was not completely sure. On the back, she had written, "I'm sorry I made you feel invisible. The truth is, I was the one who felt invisible." I showed the letter to Grant. He read it carefully and reminded me that I owed her nothing. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, and not access to my life. When I asked whether he believed she deserved another chance, he said people could change because he had changed. But real change required work, and most people did not sustain it. Whether Brianna succeeded was not my responsibility. I wrote a short response acknowledging that I had read her letter and expressing sympathy for what she had suffered. I also told her I still needed distance. Maybe one day we could have some kind of relationship, but not then. She wrote back once to say she understood, and after that she left me alone. A year and a half passed. Then Lauren called with news I never expected. Brianna was engaged to a woman named Paige, whom she had met through a therapy group. They had been together for a year, and Lauren said Brianna seemed calmer, happier, and more genuine than she had ever been. Brianna wanted to invite me to the wedding, but was afraid to contact me directly. I told Lauren I would think about it. That night, I talked with Grant. He said the decision belonged entirely to me, and he would support me either way. I asked whether he would attend with me if I chose to go. He smiled and said he would not miss the chance to stand beside me when I faced my family again. The next day, I called Brianna. We spoke for 2 hours. She told me about Paige, about therapy, and about the slow work of becoming someone she could respect. I told her about my life with Grant, our apartment, and Rocket. The conversation felt strange because for the first time, we spoke like two ordinary people instead of enemies trapped in the same family. At the end, she asked whether I would come to the wedding. She said she would understand if I declined, but my presence would mean a great deal to her. I said yes. The wedding is 2 months away, and I still do not know exactly how I will feel when I see my relatives again, or when I watch Brianna promise a life to someone while claiming she has changed. I do not know whether people completely escape their worst patterns or simply become better at recognizing them before they cause harm. Grant says life after prison taught him to take people one day at a time. Human beings can be messy, selfish, frightened, and cruel, but sometimes they surprise you. He says I surprised him because he never expected to leave prison and meet someone who could love him without pretending his past did not exist. I tell him he surprised me too. He was the first person who ever chose me over Brianna, but more importantly, he was the first person who showed me that being chosen should never have felt like a competition in the first place. Tonight we are sitting on our couch with Rocket curled between us, arguing about whether to adopt a cat. Grant says we need one for balance. I say we already have a dog. He insists that is exactly why a cat is necessary. My phone buzzes with a message from Brianna thanking me for agreeing to attend the wedding. I reply, "I'll see you there." I cannot predict what will happen when that day comes, whether Brianna and I will ever have a close relationship, or whether my family will finally understand why I needed to protect myself from them. For the first time in my life, I am not afraid of those unanswered questions. I have Grant, Rocket, our tiny apartment, and a quiet, ordinary life built on honesty instead of competition. For years, I thought I needed to win against Brianna in order to matter. Now I understand that walking away from the contest was the first time I truly chose myself, and the life I found afterward is more than enough. It is everything.